UFC 281 took place at MSG, the Mecca, Madison Square Garden, in November 2022. Some folks already calling it the card of the year. Definitely had some great fights. I think it tied for most first round finishes with like 7 of the fights that took place ending in the first round. But it was a great card. Definitely had some exciting fights. Let's start off with Dan Hooker versus Claudio the Peruvian Prince Bueyes. In round 1, Bueyes did this like sick Imanari roll, I believe it's called, into a leg lock. And Dan Hooker was like immediately in danger. Because I guess that's like Bueyes' like main thing. He's like a leg lock specialist. And Dan Hooker was like really in danger of being submitted, it seemed like, but was able to somehow roll out of it eventually after going back and forth for a while. But Bueyes definitely showed how dangerous he was there. Then in round 2, Bueyes kept trying for the same thing. He would reach for the single leg, try to take Hooker down, try to do those Imanari rolls and roll into another leg lock situation. But Hooker was able to sprawl or just, stop takedown attempt after takedown attempt. And ultimately, Hooker TKOs Bueyes after like kneeing him to the body and then following up with like a second knee. And Bueyes just like couldn't get up. And Dan Hooker won by TKO in the second. Next up, we had Frankie the Answer Edgar in his last and final MMA fight versus Chris Gutierrez. Frankie's an absolute legend, pioneer of the sport, first ballot Hall of Famer, East Coast cat from Jersey, always comes out to Biggie, kicking the door, to be precise. I've never heard of anybody, even his opponents, even other fighters, haven't heard of anyone who's ever had a bad word to say about Frankie or like didn't like him. He's definitely going to be missed, but had an absolute amazing career. He's retiring at 41 years old. He started in February of 2007. He's the former lightweight champion. He has the second most significant strikes in UFC history of any weight class with 1,799. He has the 4th most takedowns in UFC history with 73. And I believe he has the most, with this last fight, he had the most fighting time of any other UFC fighter with something like 8 or 9 hours worth of fighting. So yeah, definitely first ballot Hall of Famer. Let me get a round of fucking applause for Frankie the Answer Edgar. And to note in this fight was Gutierrez's striking. He looked so clean and precise and was just like completely on point. It's like everything he threw, not only was it landing, but it was landing exactly where he intended to land it. And Frankie, with his typical moving forward style, wound up getting caught by a flying knee from Gutierrez and got KO'd in the first round, which fucking sucked. Sucked to see in terms of, such a legend going out like that. But it's also a testament to, again, Frankie being 41 years old, last fight of his career, going up against I think Gutierrez is 30 or 31 years old, somebody, 10 years his junior, and just how much the sport evolves over time and how much better and better and better these martial artists get at what they do. But Frankie is absolutely and definitely a GOAT. Shout out again to Frankie Edgar. I'm sure he'll have a bright future in and around the sport. Then we had fight of the night, Michael Chandler versus Dustin Poirier. Chandler came out aggressive like he always does, throwing bombs, haymakers. Poirier was poised as he always is. I feel like fighters always take that approach of Poirier, and it seems not to go well for them. Like Conor had that approach, Chandler had that approach, but Poirier really does have a poise about him, and just like steady and consistently got his shots in as well. Then Chandler swarmed and hurt Dustin, and then wound up taking him down with like this big suplex. Chandler has great wrestling, and he was definitely winning. This is the first round. Just because of the swarming, even though Dustin, was getting his shots in, Chandler was swarming him and then wound up like suplexing him to the ground. So it seemed like the momentum was definitely in Chandler's favor. But then Dustin, slow and steady, wins the race. Got some strikes in, wound up knocking down Chandler in this complete flip in momentum, and almost got Chandler the fuck out of there in the first round. He was like teeing off at the end and Chandler literally got saved by the bell. Then round 2, Chandler starts off with another big takedown, and he is a bloody fucking mess. To quote Dave Chappelle, yuck. But it was like a straight ground and pound control round for Chandler. Then in round 3, Dustin winds up on top once they're again like wrestling back and forth on the ground. And in like post-fight press conferences, I heard Dustin say that like Chandler cheated. He put his like fingers in his mouth and tried to like yank Dustin by his head. And also which I definitely saw in the fight, he like blew his nose and like just blood and snot and everything just fell all over Poirier, which is fucking gross because his nose and face was like such a bloody mess. But Chandler was like, yo, I couldn't fucking breathe. I had to, it was either don't breathe or do that so I could clear my nose. Which I can't blame him too much for that, right? But it was fucking gross. And then his hand in Poirier's mouth, he said that was like completely accidental, but Poirier seems to think it was purposeful. Anyway, so they're wrestling back and forth on the ground. Poirier winds up slipping out from a Chandler takedown and winds up on top of Chandler, gets his back, and then makes him tap with a rear naked choke. But it was a wild fight. It was such a good fight. Then we have defending champion Carla Esparza versus Zhang Weili, and they are fighting for the strawweight championship. Weili was definitely the superior striker and got some kicks in early on, wound up pulling down Carla, but Carla simultaneously like grabbed Weili's neck and had her in like this weird half rear naked choke thing going on, and they went back and forth in round 1 in terms of ground control, I would say. Then in round 2, the striking advantage was even more prevalent on Weili's side. Carla wound up taking Weili down, but kept winding up in the same half rear naked choke kind of position that it was kind of like a crucifix, and Weili was able to capitalize on that, caught Carla Esparza's back and made her tap to again a rear naked choke, and she is the new strawweight champion. And unless Thug Rose Namajunas comes back, she'll probably be a champ for a while. And even if Rose comes back, to be honest, although I never count out Rose, but it definitely would be a tough fight. And then our main event of the evening of UFC 281 was Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira is the only guy to have ever knocked out Israel Adesanya back when Izzy was a kickboxer, strictly kickboxing. They actually fought twice in kickboxing, but most notably in a fight where Izzy was knocked out. Izzy was dominating Pereira for the fight and winds up getting knocked out. Pereira has since joined the UFC. He's had something like 4, maybe 5 fights in the UFC, and they gave him a title shot, obviously building up this grudge match between them. Izzy being probably like the highest selling fighter and pay-per-view draw that the UFC has right now. So round 1 starts off pretty heavy leg kicks from both sides, especially by Pereira, which seemed to be a smart strategy in trying to, slow down Izzy's movement. But they exchange leg kicks, and towards the end of round 1, it seems like it's going to be a wrap. Izzy winds up catching Pereira, caught him with the right and a left hook combo, and Pereira started doing the stinky leg and literally got saved by the bell. I was like, fuck. Obviously, I was rooting for Izzy, in case you hadn't noticed. Then this guy Pereira recovers like fucking Michael Myers, and in round 2 comes out like nothing. He catches Izzy with a few clean left hands and a nice knee, and Izzy seems hurt. He winds up like clinching with him, where Alex Pereira then wound up getting a bunch of knees and like body blows in that clinch. Then he also got a head kick and a takedown. So round 2 was like clearly Alex Pereira's, in my opinion. And round 1 was Izzy's. Then in round 3, Izzy takes down Pereira and just completely dominates him. Ground and pounds. He has a sick wrist control, keeping Pereira down on the ground, controls him the entire round, then stands up towards the end of the round and does a sick heel kick to Pereira's face while Pereira's on the floor, and then punches him and just like 100% dominates the third round. So it's 2 rounds to 1 going into the 4th. It's a slower pace round on both sides, I'd say. Both had a few connections, nothing major majorly noticeable. Pereira seemed to be slowing down, but he did hurt Izzy, it looked like, towards the end of that 4th round. But most, in terms of like commentary and stuff like that, and even, post-fight, say that going into the 5th round, it was 3-1 in favor of the champ, Israel Adesanya. Then in the 5th round, Izzy checked the kick and seemed to hurt himself by doing so. And they're exchanging, going back and forth throughout the 5th round. And then with about 2 minutes left, Pereira catches Izzy with a left jab, a straight right, an uppercut, a left hook, and just fucking started teeing off. And referee Mike Goddard stopped it, and Pereira won a TKO victory. I definitely like to see Izzy was gracious in defeat and definitely wants to get back in there. He's not shying away from a rematch. This guy technically has beat him 3 times already, only once in the UFC. The other 2 times were kickboxing only, but it definitely felt like Izzy was winning the fight. If it would have went to decision, he would have definitely won, and he wound up getting caught. But again, he wants to get back in there. He said he'll keep getting back in there until he beats this guy. He was like, he'll go to his favelas in Brazil and knock on his door when they're fucking 60 or 70 years old and be like, yo, come on, let's go. And he'll just keep coming back until he gets it right. So hats off to Izzy. And that is my little recap and review of UFC 281.